Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming to this. I've titled this Learn to Love Pivot Tables because I know from a few years of trying to teach mostly journalists data, how to work with data, pivot tables are things that people dread and they really shouldn't because they're super useful. And why are they useful? Well, they're a great way to simplify and summarize larger data sets. So you can extract useful bits of information that can sometimes lie buried in a lot of data. And they're also very useful for formatting data so that you can make a chart. You'll see this screenshot is of the data set that we're going to use. So if anybody attended the first webinar that we did, that was a very small data set. This one is much, much bigger. I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from MDAT, which is an inventory of hazards and disasters. And I just downloaded a segment of natural disasters, the ones that I thought are sort of more weather related, that happened in African countries between 2010 and 2023. So moving right along, this is what I'm going to show you how to do. We're going to use pivot tables to rank African countries by the number of floods they have between 2010 and 2023, and the number of people affected by those floods. And we're going to draw a chart like the one you can see in the screenshot that compares the number of disasters that South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria had over that same time period. Okay, so let me get rid of the slides and share my screen. Okay, there we are. So this is the data set. If you have a look, it's actually very big. I'll give you an idea of how to test this. If you click in this A at the top and you look on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see it tells you, it counts the number of rows. So there are 820 rows in this data set. And if I click in this one to highlight the whole row there, sorry, 820 rows, and this is showing you the number of columns. So you can see in the bottom corner, there are 46 columns. So there's a lot of data in this. For me to get insights, I'm just going to tell you the columns that I'm interested in. So I'm interested in the disaster type column, and I'm interested, if I scroll over, also in the country column, which is this one. And I'm interested in the start year column, and I'm interested in the total number of people affected. So you can see what I'm interested in. It's only a tiny segment of this data set. And I'm going to do a little recap of what Gemma went over in the first webinar, just how to get yourself organized. So first of all, I am going to lock my first row. So I'm going to put my cursor in row 2 and go to view, and I'm going to freeze one row. This way, if I scroll up and down, my header row stays in one place. If you can't see your header row, if you can't see the names, the full name of the disaster, so let's say, for example, it looks like this, or well, actually, just say the words are cut off. The way you get to see what the full header name is you highlight in the one in row 1, so you've got the whole row highlighted. You go to format, you go to wrapping, and you say wrap, and you'll be able to see the full names. Okay, the next thing, which is very useful to do, is we'll highlight the whole data set by saying Control or Command A, and now we want to make it filterable. So in the data column, I will create a filter, and you'll see that at the top of every column, a little upside down triangle appears. So we're going to use this just to explore our data set a little bit before we pivot. So as I said to you, I'm interested in disaster type. So if I click on this little upside down triangle, you'll see down here, it'll tell you the different types of disasters we have. So wildfire, storm, mass movement, wet, flood, extreme temperature, and drought. So it gives you a sense of what we're looking at. If I go to country and click on this, it'll show me all the countries, and you can see there's a lot. It's probably just about all African countries. If I go to year, I'll see start year, I'll see the same thing. So I've got years from 2010 to 2023. And if I go to total affected, I've got the number of people who've been affected by the storm. So it goes from 5 to 25 million. Okay, so that's the data we're dealing with. What happens if I'm only interested in South Africa? Okay, well, we can do what we did last week. We can go to country and we can clear all of the names and just choose South Africa. You'll see there's a little filter row here. So I can type in South Africa and just choose that. And we'll only get the South African entries. If I click on the top of this row, I'll see there are 44 rows. But that doesn't help. It actually is quite complicated. If I was to go, okay, how many happened in South Africa? 44. How many happened in Kenya? I would have to go through and repeat this process a number of times. And it would be time consuming. And you could make mistakes. So I'm going to show you why pivot tables are actually really useful when you want to ask specific questions of a big data set and get them quickly. So I'm back to my filter and I'm selecting all. So all my countries are back. Once again, I'm going to highlight my whole data set. And to make a pivot table, you go to Insert and then Pivot Table. And always put your pivot table in a new sheet. So I'm creating. You'll get something that looks like this. Excel looks slightly different, but the logic is the same. So what you need to look for are rows and values and columns, right? But the two most important ones that you start with are rows and values. So if I want to find out which countries had the most natural disasters, I want to start with the rows, and I'm going to click here. And you'll see I get a list of every single column header. All 46 of them appear. I want to just choose country. Now you'll see my rows are country names. I can pull this column out just so we can see the whole of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now I want to know how many natural disasters happened in each of those countries in that time period. So what I can do is count the number of times the Burkina Faso appeared. So each row will be a disaster. So if I count the number of times or the number of rows Burkina Faso appeared, I can work out how many natural disasters there were. So the next most important thing, start with rows. Your second one is values. I can add country to values. Oops, it didn't work. Add country to values. And I will get a number here. This is the number of times Algeria has appeared in that big data set. If we scroll to the bottom, we see there were a total of 819 weather-related disasters over that time period. It was 820 when we looked at the number of rows on the first page. But remember, one of those rows is the header row. So there are actually 819 disasters. What if I want to see which country had the most disasters? In the rows, you'll see there's an order and sort by. So I'm going to go, instead of ascending, I'm going to go descending. So I get from the highest to the lowest. And sort by, instead of country, which is just the country name, I'm going to sort by count A of a country. Now you can see that South Africa had the most natural disasters, 43, followed by the Democratic Republic of Congo. So something I want to draw your attention to in the values column before we move on. Can you see when we pulled in country, it had a default in the summarise by section of count A. That's because we were counting country names, and those are not numbers. So it is counting the number of times that element, South Africa, appeared. Watch what happens when we choose something that is a number. Okay, so I now want to know the total number of people affected in each country by these natural disasters. So I can add another variable to values. And I'm going to click on add, and I want to find total number affected, total people affected. So I click on that, and now you see a new column has appeared in column C with a number in it. And if you look in the total affected in your pivot table here, you'll see the default was sum. If I click here, I have a number of options. So sum and count A. You can't add a variable that isn't numbers. You can only do a sum if there are numbers. Okay, so South Africa had the most natural disasters, but what happens if we decide to sort this table by total people affected? So we'll keep the order as descending, but in here we will change from count A of country to sum of total affected. And we'll see that Ethiopia had the most number of people affected. Okay. What happens now? We want to maybe have a bar chart and see what this looks like. So I am going to go back to count of country affected. So now I've got it organized by the number of countries affected. And I want to highlight just the top 10. So let's go to Nigeria. Well, we can actually do all of them. Let's do all of them, but we don't want the grand total. So I've highlighted everything up to grand total because that'll just skew everything. And I will go to insert, and I will insert a chart. And lo and behold, the default chart is a super useful pie chart. That doesn't help really. We can't really see very much from this. So here in the chart editor, which also appears at the side, we can change this to a bar chart. And there we have a bar chart which shows the countries in order. And if I click on these three dots, I can move this to its own sheet. And now we can see where countries are ranked by the number of disasters they've had. What happens if we just want to see floods? I'm going back to the pivot table. And I'm going to go, okay, like this is all the natural disasters. And we saw when we looked at the filter that there were actually a few different types. I just want floods. You'll see at the bottom of the pivot table here, there's a thing called filters, and you can add a filter. And I want to filter that by disaster type. And in my disaster type filter at the moment, you'll see it saying show all items. If I click this, I can clear it and just choose flood. Now it's going to show me the number of floods that each country's had in that time period. And you can see that the Democratic Republic of Congo is the one with the most floods. If we look at our chart, the chart automatically changes, but I've unfortunately got the grand total in there, so you can see at the bottom, it's skewing everything. Okay, so that's number one. I've shown you how to make a bar chart that ranks countries and how to actually get a ranking of countries from a big spreadsheet. Let's think, okay, how do we compare over time how many disasters there've been in just 3 countries, South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria? So we're going to go back to our main data. You'll see tabs along the bottom that I'm clicking between, and we're going to make a whole new pivot table. So I'm going to highlight all my data, and I'm going to insert pivot table again, once again in a new sheet, and you'll see I get a brand new pivot table. This time, I don't want the countries in the rows, I want years in the rows. I want to see how many there've been in each year that we have for the downloaded data. So in rows, I'm going to add start year. And now I get a list of the start years. And I want to count how many disasters happened in each year. So in values, I'm going to add disaster type. Add disaster type. Okay, now you can see I'm counting. It's count A again because the disaster type was a word. It was flood, it was drought, it wasn't a number. So the default is count again. So it's counting each time flood appeared in a row. So now we have the number of disasters that happened, natural disasters that happened in each of the years. What if I want to know which countries those appeared in? So I can actually put more than one thing into the rows column. So if I add a country to rows, you'll see what I get. I get all of the countries and the natural disasters in 2010 and the number that they had in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. So I can actually make, you can see 2010 only appears in the top column. I can make that repeat the whole way down the side. If I click this repeat row label, now I have 2010, 2011, 2012. Okay, so this is actually really quite hard. I don't know how I'm going to illustrate this, but let's try and filter it by country and see what happens. So we're going to go to filters. We're going to add country. And we were interested in 3 countries. So I'm going to click on showing all items and I'm going to clear. And in my little search bar, I'm going to click South Africa. And I'm going to then also write Kenya and select. And I'm going to select Nigeria. Okay, so now I have 3 countries only. So we've got Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, 2010, 2010. And the total for 2010. I'm not sure the total will be useful for a chart if I want to make a line chart. So I'm going to, in country, where it says show totals, deselect that. And now I don't have the totals. Can we make a line chart? Let's see. We're going to go and highlight all the data, not including the grand total. And we're going to say insert chart. And oh, it's defaulting to column chart this time, not bar chart. But let's see what happens if we go to line. That doesn't look right. What if I switch rows and columns? No, still doesn't look right. Okay, there's something wrong with the way my data is formatted, so I need to sort that out, and I'll show you quickly what you can do. I'm going to delete this chart by clicking on the 3 dots at the side and saying delete. And now I'm going to try, and I'll show you where the columns option in your pivot table comes in useful. Let's remove country just by deleting it from the rows option. So we're just going to delete it. Now we're back to start here and count of disasters. What happens if I add countries to columns? So I'll click on the columns option, and now I've added countries to columns. I've still got the filter on, so I'm only showing Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, and I'm getting a grand total. I don't think I want this grand total for a chart, so I am going to delete that. Now I have this format, the same data, it's just in a different format. So can I make a line chart from this? Let's try. I'm going to highlight from the header row to the row just above the grand total because I don't want that in my chart. And I'm going to insert chart. And it's automatically made a line chart for me. So that's the thing. I didn't have it formatted in the correct way to make a line chart. But I want to show you something. Can you see that there are kind of gaps in the lines here? If you look at your data, that's because there's nothing in those cells because nothing happened. If I try to put a 0 in there, when it's a pivot table, I can't do it. I'm trying to type a 0 in these 2 places, but nothing's happening. That's because the pivot table is linked to your big table. And so what you have to do if you want to fix this is take this data out of the pivot table. So I'm just going to copy it, highlight it all, go to copy, and then just paste another version next to it. So I'm right-clicking and I'm going to say paste special, not paste this time, but paste special, and then choose values only. Now I have, this table is no longer linked to my main data set. So you'll see I can actually type a 0 into this. If I draw a new chart, so we'll insert chart. Now you'll see if I put these two charts next to each other, hopefully you can see them on the screen. The problem of the blank cells and the weird shapes are gone. And you can see that South Africa had a lot more weather-related disasters in 2022 than Kenya and Nigeria. We want to change the headline of this chart, so let's quickly do that. Let's just say natural, no, let's call them disasters by year in Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. And there you have it. That's a quick tour of pivot tables. I hope that it was useful.